Hello friends, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink, back with another card and video using the latest STAMPtember exclusive. This is with Hero Arts. This is the Park Scene stamp set, and to start off my card, I had one of Simon's nested circle wafer dies here, and I'm just kind of laying out some of the stamps from the set, trying to create the scene that I wanted, seeing how everything's going to fit. And then once I kind of knew what I was doing, I put this cardstock into my mini MISTI, and this is Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And I started by stamping the little park bench image first using intense black ink. And then I had stamped it a second time just onto a little piece of masking paper because I wanted to mask the bench off so I could stamp a couple more of these images. And the thing I really loved about this set is this tree. I don't know why. I loved it. So I stamped the tree with the same ink, everything I stamped with this ink. And then I stamped the cluster of leaves over it. There's also separate stamps of actual leaves, so if you didn't want to, you didn't even have to color. You could just stamp those multiple times in different shades of green or yellow or brown or whatever. So lined all that up, and then I did a teensy bit of masking on the trunk of the tree here so that I can stamp kind of the background portion of my little scene. And then I'm just going to do another little tiny bit of masking because there's this little smaller tree in the set. It's like you can just keep building. You can just keep going. I almost did. It was like, I'm going to use all the stamps in the set, but didn't quite, but I came close. So I just kept stamping till I was happy with the little scene I had created. I'm going to peel off my masks here, which is always the funnest part. And then I took that circle die again, and I just quickly traced around it with a pencil. This just saves me from coloring areas I don't need to bother with. Because if I'm planning on die cutting something or whatever, it just gives me that little bit of a visual guide to know this is where I can stop and I don't have to waste my time or my markers or whatever. So for the actual coloring, I kept it very, very simple. I just went with fall colors. I'm in a total fall mood. The leaves are changing here. It's my favorite time of year, and there's just something about, when you see the yellows and the browns and the reds and everything coming out. So I kind of emulated that with my scene here. And then with these two greens, I was using G94 and G99. When you're using two Copic markers that are kind of further apart and you don't have a third transition, because in my case, I was just too lazy to stand up and grab one, you can take the lighter marker, and I'm just touching it to the tip of the darker one, and it just kind of absorbs a tiny little bit of that darker color. And then the only thing you need to, be concerned about after you're done coloring is just making sure you've, scribbled off any dark color. In this case, there wasn't any. But if you've got a lot more darker color kind of absorbed into your later color marker, you just need to make sure to scribble it off and you're good to go. So that's what I did, just to get a little bit more of a transition between the two greens. But again, I kept the coloring really, really simple. I used a bunch of the colors on the tree just because. It was like the tree hasn't made up its mind yet. It's doing all sorts of things. So I wasn't going to color the sky either. I was just going to leave it because it would look fine. But I don't know. This blue marker was staring at me and I'm like, it needs to be on here. This color just kind of sets off everything else. So I started with the brush tip of my marker. And then once I kind of got around the edges, I just used the chisel end. This helps to, speed up coloring large areas. That's what the chisel ends are really, really good for, which I almost never use the chisel end of my markers, but for things like this, it's perfect. And then I took some warm grays, colored in this little bench here. And then once that's colored in, I'm going to stamp the birds from this set. I wasn't going to originally, and then I was like, there's space, I'm going to do that. And I also stamped a little grass stamp too, just with some green ink. And then I'm going to now die cut this with that circle wafer die. And then I also die cut a couple scraps of heavyweight white cardstock with that same circle die. I could have popped this up with foam tape, but when I'm using the 80-pound cardstock, it's a bit more flimsy than all the heavyweight cardstock I work with. So I find just die cutting more pieces of cardstock and using that to add dimension gives everything a little bit more strength. Another thing you could do is to use fun foam, craft foam. That works too. I have a love-hate relationship with craft foam, so I prefer using cardstock, and then I prefer using like foam dimensionals. I actually broke a die cutting machine using craft foam years ago, so I now kind of avoid it. But anyway, I backed this. I cut down my scene. I had intended to do this, and then I would layer on one more piece, and then cut that, layer on the last piece, and then I cut that, rather than trying to cut through all three at once. This guillotine cutter usually will cut through quite a bit, but you're kind of pushing it. Like, it's not meant to be super heavy duty in that way. So that's why I did it in stages. And then my sentiment, I cut it apart. I know that really bothers some people, but you can always butt it right back up together to use it the way it was designed. But I just find it with things like that, it's so much easier to just cut the stamps apart and then stamp them where you want them, rather than fiddling with a ton of extra like masking and all that kind of stuff. So I cut the sentiments apart because of the way I wanted to stamp them. And I just have some Desert Storm cardstock here. And I was using my main image as kind of my guide of where I was going to place the sentiment on this cardstock. And then I'm just stamping it again with that intense black ink. So I stamped the first part of it. And then this way I can now line up the part that I had trimmed off where I want it right above the sentiment, so it's not all in one line. And then once I've got that lined up where I wanted, stamp it, and then when I put it back on the stamp sheet, it's just the way it's meant to be. So yeah, it's, if you've never cut your stamps apart before, as long as you're careful, don't cut into the actual image. You do it once, you'll find it's not too bad. I know the first time I did it, I was like, oh no, what am I doing? But yeah, just it makes such a big difference. And it's pretty much mostly sentiments that I will cut apart. Things like the actual images, very rarely. Unless there's like a stamp that you just love, but you don't like certain parts of it or whatever, just cut them off. Anyway. On the inside of the card, I am stamping more sentiments from the park scene set. Just lining them up with my MISTI here and stamping them. And then I'm going to stamp that little park bench again. I don't know what it is. Same thing. I love this little stamp. I just thought it was super cute. So I stamped that on the inside of the card. And then I just quickly colored it in with those same warm gray Copic markers. My card base is Simon's 120 pound heavyweight cardstock. So unless you're really saturating the cardstock, it doesn't really show through the back at all with these. So I just quickly added that little bit of coloring to this, and then I'm going to stamp that little grass stamp again, just because. I'm going to stamp with that green ink on either side of the little bench just to finish off the inside. So I've got my little, completed inside as well. And then once that's stamped, I can now adhere my elements here. So I'm going to trim down the sentiment. So it's a little bit of a strip, and then I'm going to angle it, cut off the end, and then I'm going to adhere this to my card front with some craft tacky glue. And then once that's adhered, I'm going to adhere my little main scene. And then that's already got the cardstock behind it, so it's popped up with that bit of dimension. As always, you could leave it here. But I want to add a little bit of embellishment, but nothing, nothing sparkly, nothing, because just the way this was all coming together. So I actually just pulled out some of my Nuvo drops, and I used English mustard, I used dark walnut, and I used olive branch, and added a few of those. And then I just got to let these dry, and this card is complete. So like with all the other STAMPtember collaboration sets, this stamp set is limited edition and only while supplies last. I will have a link to the set. I will have a link to all the other supplies I used, and a link to my blog post. All that info will be in the description box below the video. Oh, and by the way, I was tapping my card onto just a container here. After using Nuvo drops, I like to tap it. It just smooths out the Nuvo drops a bit, makes them a little more like an enamel dot rather than like a really raised round piece. So I tap it a bit and then I let it dry. Anywho, links are in the description box below the video if you want to check it out. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!